On the edge of the galaxy, in a forgotten corner of space, there lay a desolate planet that had become humanity's last stand. For years, human forces had fought to protect their home from an unstoppable alien force, but the tide of war was against them. The planet had been ravaged by battles, with cities reduced to rubble and forests turned to ash. Yet this forsaken world was the only thing standing between the alien conquerors and the last surviving human colonies. Among the last defenders was a soldier named Elias. He had been through countless battles, facing enemies from distant star systems and strange worlds, yet nothing could prepare him for the alien warriors that had arrived with a singular goal: to conquer humanity. These warriors were unlike any others Elias had encountered. They were tall, strong, and fierce, led by a race of women who possessed abilities that put even the strongest human warriors to shame. For centuries, these women had never seen a male of any species. They lived in isolated warrior clans, training and hunting alone, building their strength, never knowing the existence of the opposite sex. Elias stood at the front of what was left of humanity's last fortress, watching as the alien ships hovered above the planet, blocking out the sun. The feeling of dread was heavy in the air, but Elias had never been one to give in to fear. His job was to protect the planet, and he would do it until his last breath. He had seen his friends and comrades fall in the war, but their sacrifice would not be in vain. This fortress, this last stronghold, would hold until reinforcements arrived, or until they were completely overrun. The walls of the fortress were made of a rare metal found only on this planet. It was humanity's last defense against the alien technology that had burned through every other structure in its path. Despite their advanced weapons, the aliens had never encountered such a durable material, and this gave the soldiers a small hope to cling to. But Elias knew hope could only get them so far. The aliens were patient, methodical, and relentless. They had already destroyed every other human settlement, and it was only a matter of time before they came for this one. It was late in the evening when the first wave arrived. Elias and his fellow soldiers took their positions, ready to fight. The sky above them began to hum with the sound of alien ships, their engines firing as they descended through the clouds. The aliens were coming, and they were coming in force. Elias gripped his rifle tightly, his mind focused. There was no room for hesitation now. He had been trained for this moment, prepared for this battle. He could hear the alien language crackling through the communication system, a strange, melodic sound that sent a chill down his spine. They were getting closer. The ground beneath his feet vibrated with the intensity of the approaching alien troops. As the first wave of aliens landed, Elias's squad opened fire. The alien warriors were unlike anything they had faced before, strong, fast, and able to withstand massive amounts of fire. But Elias had fought through worse. He had fought for survival, for his people, and he was ready to do it again. He moved through the battlefield with precision, directing his squad to hit the weak points in the enemy's formation. The aliens were fast, but they were not invincible. In the chaos of the battle, Elias noticed something strange. There were more alien warriors than usual, and they were acting differently. These were not the typical alien soldiers he had encountered before. They were larger, their armor more intricate, their movements more calculated. As they advanced, Elias realized that these warriors were different from the rest. They were female. He had heard rumors of the alien female warriors before, tales of their unmatched strength and skill. But seeing them in person was something else entirely. The women were warriors in every sense of the word. Their bodies were a perfect blend of power and agility, their armor a reflection of their battle-hardened nature. They moved with grace and precision, cutting through the human defenses like a hot knife through butter. Their faces were cold, emotionless, as if they had been forged for war and war alone. But what shocked Elias even more was the way they fought. They fought with a strange kind of purpose, as if they were not just trying to defeat their enemies, but to study them. Their eyes locked onto him, and for a brief moment, Elias felt like he was the subject of their examination. The alien leader, A towering figure dressed in ornate armor stepped forward. She did not speak, but her presence alone seemed to command attention. Elias watched as she raised her hand, signaling the other warriors to pause. Her gaze remained fixed on him, piercing through him like a laser. Elias had heard of the legendary female warrior leaders among the alien race, but seeing one in person was a different experience altogether. This leader, with her golden armor and towering stature, exuded power and authority. She was unlike any warrior he had faced before, and as she stared at him, Elias couldn't help but wonder what it was they saw in him. Why had they chosen to capture him? As the battle raged on, Elias was pulled away from the front lines. A group of alien warriors surrounded him, their weapons raised. He didn't resist. The battle was lost. He had been captured. But in that moment of helplessness, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this was not just another fight. It was the beginning of something much larger. These alien warriors, especially the women who led them, were about to change everything. And Elias, though he didn't know it yet, was about to play a pivotal role in that change. Elias had fought in many battles, but nothing like this. The alien warriors who captured him didn't treat him like the enemy. There was no immediate threat of death or torture, no indication that they were interested in punishing him. Instead, they seemed curious. He was dragged through the alien camp, his hands bound tightly with strange, glowing restraints, and his mind raced with questions. Why had they taken him alive? What did they want from him? The alien camp was unlike anything Elias had seen before. It was hidden deep in the alien landscape, away from the battlefield. It was not a place of technology or warfare, but one of nature. Tall, twisted trees and glowing plants surrounded the area, and strange sounds echoed in the air. It was as if the warriors had created their own little world, one where they could observe, learn, and grow in peace, far from the wars that raged outside. Elias was shoved into a large circular chamber, a wide stone floor stretching beneath him. His feet scraped against the smooth surface as he stumbled inside, trying to regain his balance. The room was filled with alien warriors, all of them women, each wearing elaborate armor that seemed to shimmer in the low light. They all turned their attention to him as he was forced into the center of the room, their eyes studying him closely. The alien leader, the one who had stared at him during the battle, was among them. She stood taller than the others, her armor more detailed, and her presence demanded respect. She was the one who had given the order to capture him, and Elias couldn't shake the feeling that she was the key to everything that had happened. For a moment, there was silence. No one moved, and Elias felt his heart pound in his chest. He had fought for his life countless times, but standing here, surrounded by these strange and powerful warriors, he felt an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear: this was no ordinary battle. He had stepped into something much larger than he could have imagined. The leader stepped forward, her golden armor gleaming even in the dim light. Her eyes locked onto Elias, and for a brief moment, he felt a chill run down his spine. Her gaze was intense, almost as if she were reading his thoughts. He couldn't look away. There was something unsettling about the way she observed him, something that went beyond the typical aggression of an enemy. It was as if she was studying him, searching for something hidden beneath his surface. Elias clenched his jaw, trying to stay calm. He had faced enemies of all kinds, but these women were different. There was no anger in their eyes, no hatred, just curiosity and intensity. They seemed fascinated by him, not as a soldier to be defeated, but as something they had never encountered before. Without saying a word, the leader raised her hand, signaling to the warriors around her. Two of them stepped forward and began to examine Elias closely. They circled him, their eyes scanning him from head to toe, as if they were trying to understand what made him different from the other humans they had fought. They whispered to each other in their alien language, a soft, melodic sound that filled the air. Elias stood still, his mind racing. He couldn't understand what was happening. Why were they so focused on him? Was it because he was human, Or was there something more to this encounter? He couldn't be sure, but he knew one thing. His fate was now in their hands. The leader gestured for Elias to kneel. He hesitated for a moment, but there was no choice. The warriors around him were far stronger than he was, and resisting would only make things worse. He dropped to one knee, his head lowered, as a sign of submission. The leader stepped closer, her eyes still locked onto him. For the first time since his capture, she spoke. Her voice was low and commanding, yet strangely calm. "Who are you?" she asked, her words carrying an air of authority. Elias lifted his head slightly, meeting her gaze. "I am a soldier," he replied simply, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his chest. "I fight for my people." The leader nodded slowly, as if considering his words. "You are the last of your kind," she said, almost to herself. "A male." Elias flinched at the word. The concept of being the last of anything had always been a terrifying thought, but in this moment, it felt even more surreal. He had heard whispers of these female warriors. Their race had lived for centuries without ever encountering a male of any species. It was said that they lived in a world of all female warriors, where there was no need for men. But now he stood before them as the first human male they had ever seen. "Why did you capture me?" Elias asked, his voice firm but tinged with confusion. "What do you want from me?" The leader's eyes softened for a moment, her expression shifting slightly. "You are not like the others," she said, her tone thoughtful. "You interest us. We have never seen your kind. We have never seen a male." The realization hit Elias like a wave. These alien warriors had never encountered a male human before. To them, he was something new, something unknown, and that was why they had captured him. They weren't here to kill him. They were here to study him. Elias didn't know whether to be relieved or worried. Being studied by these powerful, intelligent beings could be both a blessing and a curse. But he knew one thing. The war he had been fighting was no longer the same. He was now part of something much larger, something he could not yet fully understand. As the leader continued to watch him, Elias couldn't help but feel the weight of her gaze. She wasn't just seeing him as a soldier, she was seeing him as a mystery. And in that moment, Elias realized that the war for survival was about to take a very different turn. Elias sat in the center of the alien chamber, his arms still bound tightly with the strange glowing restraints. The leader and her warriors circled around him, their eyes never leaving him for long. They didn't speak, but their presence was overwhelming, as though they were silently debating what to do with him. The air was thick with anticipation, and Elias could feel the tension in every movement of the alien warriors. They had captured him, but he wasn't sure why. At least, not yet. The leader's golden armor shimmered as she moved closer to him, her gaze never wavering. She was different from the other warriors, more imposing, more regal. It was clear to Elias that she wasn't just the leader by rank. She was a figure of power, someone who commanded respect without even having to raise her voice. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, and he felt as though she were reading him like an open book. "You are unlike the others," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Humans, we have studied them, but you are different." Elias didn't understand what she meant. He had seen the alien warriors before, heard stories about their strength and their unwavering focus on conquest. But the way the leader spoke to him, as if he were something to be studied, was unsettling. They had seen humans before. They had fought against humanity's forces for years. What was so different about him? "What do you want from me?" Elias asked again, his voice steady despite the unease he felt. "Why am I here?" The leader stepped back slightly, raising a hand to signal the other warriors. They moved to the sides of the chamber, gathering strange, glowing objects. Elias had no idea what they were, but they looked like ancient tools, some of them inscribed with symbols he couldn't recognize. The warriors worked quickly, preparing something in the middle of the room. He was still on his knees, his eyes shifting between the leader and the tools. trying to make sense of what was happening. It felt as though the warriors were preparing for some kind of ritual, but the purpose of it was still a mystery to him. After a moment, the leader returned to his side, holding an object in her hand. It was small, no larger than the palm of her hand, but it radiated a soft, blue glow. Elias could feel the energy coming from it, and he instinctively tensed. Was this some kind of weapon? Were they planning to use it on him? The leader didn't speak immediately, her eyes studying him closely. She then placed the glowing object on the ground in front of him. The blue light flickered for a moment, and Elias felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't pain, but it was uncomfortable, as if something deep inside him was being stirred. The leader nodded to the warriors, and they stepped back, giving Elias some space. The object on the ground continued to glow, its light becoming brighter with each passing second. The leader's voice broke the silence once more. "We seek to understand you," she said. "We seek to know your strength." Elias wasn't sure what she meant. Understand him. Know his strength. He was just a soldier, one man fighting in a war that seemed impossible to win. But these warriors didn't seem to view him as just another soldier. They saw him as something more, something they needed to understand. The leader gestured for him to rise, and though he was still unsure what was happening, he obeyed. His legs ached from kneeling, and he stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The warriors around him watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. As he stood, the leader raised the glowing object again, bringing it closer to him. This time, Elias could see the strange symbols on it, etched deeply into the surface. They seemed to pulse with energy, and he could feel the vibrations in the air around him. "You are the last of your kind," the leader said, her voice low and serious. "Your people have fought for their survival, but you have been isolated. You have not faced us. We have only known the strength of your women. Now we must understand the strength of your men." Elias wasn't sure what she meant by the strength of your men, but it was becoming clear that these warriors were not like the enemies he had fought in the past. They were not simply looking to destroy humanity. They were studying it. They wanted to know more about him, about humans, and what made them strong. The leader stepped forward again, placing the glowing object against his chest. It wasn't painful, but the energy it radiated seemed to connect with something deep inside him. Elias felt a surge of heat pass through his body, as if the object was drawing something out of him, something he hadn't even known was there. The other warriors watched intently, their eyes locked on the scene unfolding before them. They had never seen a male human before, and now they were learning more about him than Elias could have ever imagined. He could sense their curiosity, their fascination. This wasn't just about survival, it was about discovery. For a moment, Elias wondered if they had captured him for this purpose all along. Maybe it wasn't just about conquering humanity. Maybe it was about understanding them, studying them, and learning what made them tick. The leader's eyes narrowed as the energy from the object seemed to reach its peak. Elias felt a strange pressure building inside him, but it wasn't painful. It was as if the object was unlocking something, a potential inside him he hadn't realized existed. Finally, the energy began to fade, the glowing object dimming as the leader stepped back. Elias took a deep breath, feeling strangely exhausted, as if a weight had been lifted from his chest. The warriors around him murmured among themselves, their expressions a mix of awe and curiosity. The leader looked at Elias one last time, her expression unreadable. "You are unlike any we have encountered," she said, her voice calm. "We will learn from you. You will help us understand what makes your species so strong." Elias didn't know what to say. He had been captured, studied, and now, it seemed, he was expected to teach these warriors something about himself. But one thing was certain, his role in this war, and in this strange encounter, was far from over. Elias was no stranger to tests of strength. He had been through countless training exercises, fought in wars, and survived battles that should have killed him. But nothing in his past could have prepared him for what he was about to face. The alien warriors, especially their leader, had made it clear that they weren't just interested in fighting him. They wanted to understand him, to learn about his strength. And as he stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by curious eyes, he could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. The leader, her golden armor gleaming in the low light, approached him once again. Her expression was unreadable, her sharp eyes studying him with a quiet intensity. She had been the one to pull him from the battlefield, and now she seemed to be the one guiding him through this strange, unfamiliar ritual. There was no hostility in her gaze, but Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he was being tested in ways he couldn't yet understand. "You will prove your strength," she said, her voice calm and commanding. "Not through violence, but through endurance. You will show us what makes you human, what sets your species apart." Elias didn't fully understand what she meant, but he knew he had no choice but to follow her instructions. He was their prisoner, and the more he resisted, the more dangerous this situation could become. So he nodded, steeling himself for whatever came next. The leader stepped back, motioning to the warriors around him. Two of them moved to the side, gathering more of the glowing objects from earlier. Elias wasn't sure what they were, but he could sense the energy that radiated from them. They weren't weapons in the traditional sense, but they seemed to have some kind of power, something that could affect him on a deeper level. One of the warriors stepped forward, holding a small spherical object in her hands. It was dark in color, with a strange metallic sheen. She placed it on the ground between Elias and the leader, and the moment it touched the floor, it began to hum. The sound was low at first, barely audible, but it quickly grew louder, filling the room with a strange vibration. Elias felt his muscles tense as the energy from the object seemed to seep into the air. It was like a pressure, pushing against him from all sides. The warriors watched intently, their eyes never leaving him. This wasn't a simple test of strength, it was something more. "The object will challenge you," the leader explained, her voice steady. "You must hold your ground. Show us how long you can endure." Elias glanced at the object on the ground. It wasn't large, but the energy radiating from it was powerful. He wasn't sure what kind of effect it would have on him, but he knew he had no choice but to try. He braced himself, standing tall and planting his feet firmly on the ground. For a few moments, nothing happened. The object continued to hum, sending vibrations through the floor beneath him, but it was bearable. Elias relaxed, thinking for a moment that this test might not be as difficult as he had imagined. But then, the energy from the object surged. It was as if a wave of pressure had crashed into him all at once. Elias gasped, his breath catching in his throat as the energy slammed into his body. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to fight to stay upright. The force wasn't physical, but it was as if his body was being tested from the inside out. His heart raced, his mind struggled to focus, and his muscles began to burn with the strain. He gritted his teeth, fighting to keep his balance. The vibrations increased in intensity, each wave hitting him like a shock. It felt as though the very air around him was thick with pressure, pushing against him from all sides. Sweat dripped down his face, his arms trembling, but he refused to let himself fall. The leader's gaze remained fixed on him, her expression unwavering. She wasn't showing any signs of concern or pity. She was watching, studying him. Elias knew that this was the moment that would determine how these warriors viewed him. He wasn't just a prisoner. He was a test subject, a subject of fascination. And if he failed now, it might mean something much worse than defeat. Time seemed to stretch on, each second feeling like an eternity. The energy from the object continued to batter him, pushing him to his limits. He could feel the strain on his body, the sharp pain in his muscles, but he refused to give in. His mind screamed for him to stop, but his willpower pushed him forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the energy began to fade. The vibrations lessened, and the pressure that had been bearing down on him slowly dissipated. Elias took a deep breath, his body aching from the effort. He had made it. He had endured. The leader stepped forward, her sharp eyes scanning him once more. "You have withstood the test," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Your endurance is remarkable." Elias didn't know whether to feel relief or pride. He had passed the test, but what did it mean? Was he just another subject for them to study, or was there something more to his survival? He didn't know, but he knew that his struggle was far from over. The warriors around him murmured among themselves, their voices low as they exchanged thoughts. Elias stood silently, waiting for the next command. He had proven his strength, but now he had to prove something else, his value to these alien warriors, who had shown him both curiosity and respect. The leader turned away from him, speaking softly to the others in their alien language. Elias couldn't understand their words, but he could sense their growing interest. He had shown them that he was more than just a prisoner. He had shown them that humanity had strength, not just in battle, but in endurance, in the ability to withstand even the most impossible of trials. He didn't know what would come next, but one thing was certain: the war was no longer just about survival. It was about discovery, about proving that humanity could endure, even in the face of the unknown. Elias could feel the weight of the moment settle over him. The energy from the test had drained him, leaving him exhausted and sore, but there was something else in the air now, something different. He had passed their trial, but the alien warriors weren't done with him yet. Their interest in him had only deepened, and Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far more complicated. The leader of the warriors, still standing in front of him, watched him carefully, her golden armor reflecting the soft light in the chamber. She seemed pleased with his endurance, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was thinking beyond this simple test. To them, Elias was more than just a human soldier. He was an enigma, a mystery they were determined to solve. "You have shown us your strength," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But strength alone is not enough. We need to understand your mind, your spirit. We must know what drives you." Elias felt a pang of unease. He had fought many battles, faced countless enemies, and endured more than most men could ever imagine. But he wasn't sure what they wanted from him now. They didn't seem interested in his fighting skills anymore. They wanted to understand him on a deeper level. And that thought made him nervous. What could they possibly want from a soldier like him? What part of him could they learn from? The leader raised her hand, signaling to the other warriors. They stepped back and began to prepare another set of objects. This time, smaller and more intricate. Elias couldn't tell what they were, but he could see the focus in their movements. They were preparing for something. Whatever it was clear that this trial would be different from the last one. "We will test your mind now," the leader said, her voice steady. "Endurance is one thing, but we need to see if your mind is as strong as your body." Elias felt a knot tighten in his stomach, a test of his mind. That was a whole new challenge. He had been trained for physical combat, for survival in harsh conditions, but his mind was something else entirely. He was used to being in control, to thinking on his feet in battle. But this felt different. The warriors moved swiftly, placing the small objects in a circle around Elias. They didn't speak, but their eyes followed his every movement. The leader stepped forward again, holding a new object. This one smaller, shaped like a crystal. It seemed to glow faintly, pulsing with an energy that Elias couldn't understand. "Focus," the leader said. "Place your mind into this crystal. Let it see you. Let it understand you." Elias stared at the crystal, unsure of what to do. He had always relied on his instincts in battle, but this was different. His instincts told him to avoid the object, to resist, but the leader's calm voice kept him in place. He didn't know what the warriors wanted from him, but he knew one thing. They weren't going to let him go until he gave them something. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling as he took the crystal. The moment his fingers touched it, a strange sensation ran through him. It wasn't painful, but it was as if the crystal was probing his mind. searching for something hidden deep within him. It was a strange feeling, one that made him feel exposed, vulnerable. His thoughts raced. What were they doing? What were they looking for? He had always prided himself on being in control of his own mind. He had never let anyone see him as anything other than a soldier, a fighter. But now, as the crystal pulsed with energy in his hand, he realized that he was no longer in control. The alien warriors were digging deeper into his psyche than he had ever allowed anyone to go. The leader's eyes never left him. She seemed calm, but there was a fire in her gaze, an unspoken understanding that Elias couldn't quite grasp. The crystal began to glow brighter, and Elias felt his mind begin to shift. It wasn't a physical pain, but it was a deep pressure, as though something inside his mind was being unlocked, something he hadn't been aware of before. He struggled to keep his thoughts together, but the crystal's energy was relentless, pushing deeper, exploring every corner of his consciousness. Images flashed in his mind, memories of his childhood, his first days as a soldier, the faces of comrades he had lost. His heart raced as his most private thoughts were pulled from his mind, exposed to the crystal's power. He could feel it. He could feel the warriors around him watching, learning, absorbing his memories. For the first time in his life, Elias felt truly vulnerable. He had always fought with everything he had, his body, his strength, his willpower, but this was different. This was not a battle against an enemy, but against his own mind. And it was a battle he didn't know how to win. The pressure continued to build. Elias could feel his thoughts beginning to blur, the crystal's power overwhelming him. He closed his eyes tightly, trying to focus, trying to regain control. But it was impossible. His memories, his emotions, everything was being laid bare, exposed for these alien warriors to see. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the pressure lifted. The crystal stopped glowing, and Elias opened his eyes, gasping for breath. His heart was pounding, his body covered in a cold sweat. He felt drained, as though the crystal had taken something from him, something he couldn't quite define. The leader stepped forward again, her eyes fixed on him with an unreadable expression. "You have passed," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "Your mind is strong. You are more than just a soldier. You are a survivor, a fighter. And that is what we needed to see." Elias didn't know what to say. He was shaken, his mind still reeling from the experience. He had never been so exposed in his life, but the leader's words gave him something to hold on to. He had passed their test. He had shown them his strength, both physical and mental. But what did it mean? What would come next? The leader's eyes softened for a moment, and Elias felt a strange connection between them, a recognition of sorts. "You are not what we expected," she said softly. "You are more, and that makes you valuable." The words hung in the air, and Elias couldn't help but wonder what his role in this strange, alien world would be. He had endured their tests. He had shown them what humanity was capable of. But now he had to face the real question. What would they do with him? Elias felt a strange sense of weightlessness as he stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the silent, watching alien warriors. His body was still recovering from the mental test, the pressure of the crystal still lingering in the back of his mind. But the leader's words had struck a chord with him. He was more than just a soldier, more than just a prisoner. And somehow, that realization made him feel both proud and uneasy at the same time. The leader, still standing before him, had stepped back, giving him space to collect himself. She seemed calm, her golden armor reflecting the dim light in the room. But there was an intensity in her gaze that he couldn't ignore. She wasn't looking at him as a mere human anymore. She was looking at him as something important. Elias wiped his brow, his thoughts racing. What did it all mean? Why had they singled him out? The alien warriors had been studying humanity for years, but they had never shown this level of interest in a single soldier before. The tests he had endured were more than physical trials. They were about understanding his very essence, about discovering what made him tick. "You are not what we expected," the leader had said, her voice soft but resolute. "You are a survivor, a fighter, and that is what we need." But for what? What did they need him for? He had survived, yes, but it wasn't because of any special skill or ability. It was because of his will to live, his desire to protect those he cared about. He had fought for his people, for humanity, but now it seemed that his fight had become something else entirely. The leader stepped forward again, her eyes never leaving him. She didn't speak, but the warriors around her seemed to shift, their attention focused entirely on Elias. The air in the chamber felt thick with anticipation. He had passed their tests, but what did they want from him now? "Your kind has always been resilient," the leader spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Your species endures, no matter the odds. But we need more than resilience. We need understanding." Elias frowned. "Understanding?" he asked. "What do you mean?" The leader's gaze softened, and she motioned for him to follow her. The warriors parted, creating a path for him to walk. Elias hesitated for a moment, but then he followed, wondering where she was taking him. He had no choice but to trust her, for now. The passageway they entered was narrow, the walls smooth and metallic. The air was cooler here, and Elias could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him. As they walked, the leader didn't speak, but the tension in the air was palpable. Elias could sense that this wasn't just another part of the alien ship. This was something different, something important. They arrived at a large chamber, far larger than the one they had just left. It was filled with strange, glowing panels and intricate machines. Some of them hummed with energy, while others seemed dormant, waiting to be activated. The walls were lined with screens, displaying information Elias couldn't read. It looked like a control room of some kind, but there was something more to it. The atmosphere in the room was charged with a sense of purpose. The leader turned to face him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something. "This is the heart of our mission," she said quietly. "This is where we gather knowledge, about your species, about your world." Elias looked around the room, his mind spinning. "You've been studying us," he said, more to himself than to the leader. "But why? What do you want with us?" The leader's expression was hard to read, but there was a hint of something in her eyes, something that suggested they had a plan. "We have learned much from your people," she said, her voice steady. "But we need more. We need to understand the core of your strength, your survival. And you, Elias, are the key." Elias's heart skipped a beat. He had expected this to be some kind of test, but this was something different. They weren't just studying his body or his mind. They were studying the very essence of what made humanity capable of surviving against all odds. He shook his head. "I don't understand," he said, his voice low. "What do you mean I'm the key?" The leader didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked over to one of the machines, her fingers brushing against a series of glowing symbols. The machine hummed to life, and a holographic display flickered into existence in front of Elias. The display showed images of Earth, of human cities, of landscapes he recognized. But there were also unfamiliar images, strange symbols, and patterns he couldn't comprehend. "This is what we seek," the leader explained. "We need to understand the connections between your species and the world you live on. We need to understand your survival, your resilience, your will to endure. And you, Elias, are the key to unlocking that understanding." Elias stared at the display, trying to make sense of it. He had always known that humanity was resilient, that they could fight through anything. But this felt like something deeper, something more profound than just the survival of a species. It was as if the aliens were looking for the very essence of what made humans human. "You want to know how we fight," Elias said slowly. "How we survive. But it's not just our bodies or our minds that make us strong. It's the way we never give up. The way we come together, no matter how impossible the odds." The leader nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "That is what we need to understand. The bond that ties your species together. The strength that comes from your unity." Elias felt a strange sense of pride swell in his chest. He had always believed in humanity's ability to endure, to fight for what mattered. But to hear it spoken aloud by these alien warriors, these beings who had been studying humanity for so long, was something else entirely. The leader's gaze softened, and for the first time, Elias saw a flicker of something akin to respect in her eyes. "You are not like the others," she said. "You are more than just a soldier. You are a symbol of what humanity can be." Elias didn't know what to say. He had never thought of himself as anything more than a soldier, a man doing his duty. But in this moment, surrounded by these alien warriors, he realized that he might be something more, something they hadn't expected. The leader turned toward the machine again, her face set with determination. "We will learn from you, Elias. And when the time comes, you will help us understand the true power of your species." Elias didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. His journey was far from over. And whatever the aliens had planned for him, he would be ready. Elias had been through a lot since being brought aboard the alien ship. He had endured grueling tests of strength, faced challenges that tested both his body and his mind, and had learned that the warriors who held him captive were not just interested in defeating him. They were trying to understand him. He had passed their trials, but now, standing in the heart of their control room, he realized that the true test was yet to come. The leader, still standing before him, studied him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Her golden armor gleamed in the soft light of the chamber, and her sharp eyes never left his face. But despite the calm exterior, Elias could feel the tension in the air. The time for games and tests was over. Now, it was time to decide what would happen next. "You have shown us your strength," the leader said, her voice steady and measured. "You have proven yourself capable of withstanding the trials we set before you. But there is more we need from you, Elias." Elias stood silently, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what they expected of him now. He had endured their tests, had allowed them to probe his mind, and had shown them the strength of humanity. But what more could they want? The leader motioned toward the display that had shown Earth and the images of human life. The holographic images flickered before him, showing scenes of war, peace, and the bonds that held humanity together. He saw the faces of soldiers, of civilians, of families coming together in times of crisis. He saw the endless struggle of humanity to survive and thrive against impossible odds. "This," the leader said, "is what we need to understand. The resilience of your people, the unity that drives you. We have studied your species for years, but we have never been able to grasp the true nature of your strength. We need you to help us unlock it." Elias's mind raced. He had always known that humanity was strong. It was in their will to survive, their desire to protect one another, their determination to face the unknown. But he didn't know how to explain it, how to put it into words that these alien warriors could understand. He wasn't a philosopher or a scientist. He was a soldier. He fought, he endured, but he had never stopped to think about what made humanity so strong. "You want me to show you how we fight," Elias said slowly, his voice firm. "But it's not just about the fight. It's about the people we fight for. We fight for our families, our friends, for the future of our children. We fight because we believe in something bigger than ourselves." The leader nodded, her expression thoughtful. "We have seen your kind fight before. But it is not the fighting that makes you strong. It is the reason behind it. The will to protect, to endure. That is what sets you apart." Elias felt a spark of understanding. He wasn't just a soldier to these aliens. He was a symbol, a representative of something much greater, of humanity itself. They wanted to know what made humanity tick, what gave them the strength to face seemingly insurmountable odds and never give up. The leader's gaze softened for a moment, and she stepped closer to him. "You have shown us your strength," she repeated. "Now we need to ask something of you." Elias looked at her, unsure of what she meant. What do you want from me? The leader's voice was quiet but filled with determination. We need your help. There is a war coming, a conflict that will determine the fate of not just your world, but many others. We have the strength to fight, but we need your people's resilience, your unity, to win. Will you stand with us, Elias? Will you fight alongside us to protect your world and others? The words hit Elias like a punch to the gut. A war. A conflict that would affect not just Earth, but many other worlds. He had always fought to protect his people, to defend what mattered most. But this was something far bigger than any battle he had ever fought. He looked around the room, at the alien warriors who had tested him, who had studied him. They were not his enemies, not yet, at least. They had shown him a level of respect he had never expected. They were asking for his help, not as a prisoner, but as an ally. Elias's mind raced. He didn't know if he could trust these aliens, but he knew one thing. They were serious. This was no longer just about survival. It was about a much larger fight, a fight that could change the fate of countless worlds. And Elias had always fought for the right cause. He took a deep breath, looking the leader in the eye. I don't know what this war is, but if it means protecting Earth, protecting humanity, I'll stand with you. I'll fight alongside you. The leader's eyes softened, and for the first time, Elias saw a flicker of something resembling gratitude. Thank you, she said quietly. You are a rare soul, Elias. Your strength, your heart, these are the qualities we need. Elias nodded, his resolve hardening. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew this was the right choice. He would fight. He would stand with these warriors, not as a prisoner, but as an ally. And together, they would face the coming war. The leader stepped back, signaling to the others. The warriors gathered, nodding in approval. Elias felt a surge of hope rise within him. This was just the beginning. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Elias was no longer just a soldier in a fight for survival. He was part of something much larger. And whatever came next, he would face it with everything he had.